Live.
Oh. Hello, and welcome to episode 480 of Let's Drone Out, joined this week by our special guests from the AM32 project. You're joined this week by Andrew Tridgwell, by Pete, also known as Alka, and
Good
we've got
evening.
our regulars here, everyone's favourite, Curry Kitten,
Hello.
Jack the ESC. This was his Halloween outfit. We also have Cole.
Howdy.
And myself, Stephen. Welcome to everyone, and thanks for the AM32 crew joining us this evening. We've got one more of their number who will be with us shortly. He's just sorting out some domestic affairs and will be with us in a few minutes. But we wanted to spend some time talking about the progress. I think we last looked at AM32 probably a year or so ago, and it was very early days, and we were kind of chatting to Ike, aka Unit, about beta flight in AM32, and things have exploded then, obviously, since kind of embargo was put on to Beal Heli 32, which meant that they effectively stopped exporting everything, and very quickly all attention focused to the alternative project, which is AM32, now commanding a lion's share of the 32-bit ESC market out of nowhere. So tell me, guys, how's it been adjusting to all of that?
Wild. It's just been, it's been overwhelming for the past few months. That's my personal take on it. There's just been too much too fast, but luckily we've got Andrew now, so so we're all set.
Causing trouble.
We had to bring in a superhero to help us out to get AM32 to the next level.
So Pete, you were kind of the originator of AM32. You mentioned Andrew being a bit of a superhero, and Andrew's been around the block, haven't you, Andrew?
Yeah, but I'm very new in this area, so I know bugger all about motor control compared to what Pete knows. And luckily, Pete knows a lot about motor control and can deal with all of that side of things. Yeah, I'm just delighted that there's a good open source alternative for ESCs, because I've just been frustrated by software issues with ESCs for years and years and years on bigger vehicles, and vehicles falling out of the sky due to ESC firmware issues. So I am looking forward to being able to make the ESCs really, really rock solid. And so my focus is on those bigger vehicles.
That's fantastic. And obviously, the bigger vehicles part comes from some of your background as an Autopilot developer, right?
Yeah, exactly. And helping people with larger sort of the sort of 20 kilo, 50 kilo, 100 kilo plus type vehicles, and where they're even a rare failure on a little racing quad, or if you get an ESC failure occasionally, well, okay, you might not win that race or whatever, but you pick it up and rebuild and go again. But on a bigger vehicle, there's more consequences, and a bit more pricey. So really interested in being able to find ways of making them just as robust as we possibly can.
So can I ask a real beginner question? And this is coming from someone. I feel there's many of us out there that treat an ESC like this black box. You connect a motor to it, you connect the signal wire to it, and it goes. So when I always hear about, people are developing new firmware for it, I'm thinking, what's to do apart from your firmware takes the control signal and says motor spin? And aside from the fact that we've had protocols that do this quicker, what else is there? Because it sounds like there's a whole lot to get your teeth into. But from my stupid layman's point of view, I'm just thinking control, make motor spin. Is there more to it than that? Clearly there is.
Yeah, there's you're right. You almost could make a motor spin with a very small, very simple set of instructions, and maybe even do it with discrete components, just as soon as a comparator reads a certain voltage level, it turns on a MOSFET, which activates a phase and gets the motor spinning. But it doesn't account for any of the millions of things that can go wrong. And that is where the magic sort of happens. You could write software to make a motor spin very, very easily. But then what if the voltage changes? What if zero cross doesn't happen on time? What if one happens too early or too late? What if the PWM that's sent to the motors is interfering with the times that zero crosses happen? And then you have to start coordinating this with how you're applying power to the motor too, based on the input signal and how quickly you can change power levels, what sort of you're trying to minimize the delays from when an input signal is received, converted into an output to power and delivered to the motors. And at the same time, you're still trying to do all these checks and balances to try to make sure that the motor has done everything that it's supposed to do. So we could just drive a motor very simply and assume that everything is going to work out well, but it's unfortunately it's a very imperfect environment, and so the MCU is constantly doing filtering, checking, readjusting, making sure that the timings are as close to ideal as possible. And it's shocking me how much work there is to do, because I was under almost the same assumption at first that if you drive a motor at low voltage, you should be able to use the same logic to drive a motor at high voltage. There's nothing that's changing. You're just increasing the voltage of the system. But as we keep on increasing voltages and current demands, then we're seeing more fluctuations on the system, more things we have to do to try to avert disaster when something doesn't happen when we expect it to, or when something is not aligned the way we expect it to when it comes to zero cross. So it's so it's 90% error checking and correction, and a very small amount of running a routine that does a very simple thing, which is look at when a zero cross happens and energizes phases to make the motor move to the next phase. It's just the problem is that it's the world is not perfect and the motors aren't perfect, and then we have to do a massive amount of corrections afterwards. But no, I never thought it would take this much work either. So
It sounds much more complex now you've explained it, because there were lots of words I didn't even understand. So there's clearly a lot to it.
it's
Should we
They
just
just
break
made
down
them all
some of
up
the
just then.
fundamentals? Because we hear people talk about zero crossings a lot, and I kind of vaguely intuit, but from your mouths, what's the correct way to describe what a zero crossing is?
well, it's okay. So when you're driving a brushless motor, we energize two phases at a time. So there's three legs of the brushless motor, a three-phase motor. So we will set one phase low, another phase we will give voltage to, so that there's now current flowing from one phase through to the other phase. That leaves one phase floating, that it doesn't have any current through that phase, where we don't energize that one at all. And what we do with that final phase is we monitor the voltage on that phase. When that voltage on that phase goes from a low point or a high point and crosses the midway point of voltage, we know that that phase is because that voltage is produced by that a magnet moving in front of the coil. So when that voltage changes, we know the position of that magnet relative to the motor's coil. So then we can then change which coils we energize to realign the phases based on when that zero cross happened. So we're always um, looking at which phases not energized, so that we can constantly move or advance the phase that we are energizing one step ahead. And it's sort of like dragging around a horse with a carrot. Each time it reaches the carrot, we move it one step further again. And a zero cross is just our way of getting a snapshot of where the rotor is at any given point in time. And we can tell when that position is because it produces a voltage when a magnet moves in front of the unenergized motor coils. And when that voltage exceeds a certain threshold, we can tell exactly where that magnet is. And then we apply the current to a new set of phases to drive it again.
So that's fundamental to everything, like detecting if the rotor's stuck, or figuring out if you've hit something with the rotor, or figuring out if it's going a little too slow and it needs more power and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. We energize a phase and then we observe the final phase that's not energized. And depending on that observation, if we don't see zero cross, we know that something bad has happened. If it happens much too early, we know something bad has happened. But we're examining that final phase to see basically what the voltage is on that phase. Now we're using on the ESC these hardware comparators, which are just comparing two voltages. And when one voltage exceeds the other, it gives you a 1, or when it drops below the other, it gives you a 0. So it changes that instead of having to constantly poll that phase to see what the voltage is, we just use the comparator to compare the two phases voltages and tell us whether one is higher or not to the other voltage. And so we're comparing the phase voltage to the average of all three phases to find out where that phase is or that magnet is at any given point in time. So
Hmm.
it's
So
it's
how
a
long-
fairly
Yeah.
Carry on. It's a fairly simple procedure, but it's just there's just so
a
many
lot of
things that can go
nuance.
wrong.
Simple
Yeah,
procedure
exactly.
with a ton of nuance. Okay. I noticed that the latest release, 2.16, you've put out quite recently, you're still going on adding a lot of features. Something caught my eye that there's some kind of auto timing advance. And I remember getting into quads, hearing umpteen people disperse canned wisdom about timing advance and what it should be set to or not set to. You're automating this particular problem for pilots now?
Yeah, the timing advance or auto timing advance was it seemed to solve some problems with particular motors when it comes to hard braking and not losing synchronization. Where a lower timing advance seemed to do better when it came to rapid deceleration, and a higher timing advance seemed to do better with rapid acceleration. So with auto
Oh, wow.
timing advance, we just set it so that when the throttle value is high, the timing advance is high. When the throttle value is low, it drops the timing advance value low.
Neat.
And it's for some people, it actually works very well for some setups. There's so many variables that it doesn't work for all quads the way we want it to, but some people it seems to give them uh, remarkably more control than a fixed timing advance, especially when it comes to braking. So yeah, we put it in there as an option, and so it seems that some people are now using it and enjoying it. So it's hopefully we'll get more feedback, and then can maybe fine tune that feature a bit more in the future.
Well, it's awesome to see you're out there communicating new ideas and letting people experiment and exploring what can be done. I think that's the magic to it, right? Offering people a chance to explore ideas.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean that's I mean sometimes I implement things and don't even really know the full effects of the things I'm doing, because I just there's so many combinations of motors that we really need we need lots of hours and lots of experimentation by lots of people on lots of setups to really get to see the benefit of some of these and drawbacks on some systems, and so we can start making recommendations to other people. But
Yeah.
so sometimes we'll just make something an option, and then people can play around with that option, and hopefully
Yeah, it's got to be
We'll
really
fine-tune it
hard to
as time
find.
goes on.
Got to be really hard to find the corner cases on the bench because you're looking at all those weird situations when something really unusual happens to the motor, voltage fluctuation, physical conditions, so forth. How do you test for that?
Well, it's so hard now, especially on bench tests, because we were getting to the point where sometimes we're trying to look at, we're trying to find problems that happen 1 in a million commutations on 1 in 100 hardware setups, and so it's yeah. I mean, that's why we really need as many developers as possible and as many people testing as possible and as much feedback as possible because I just can't reproduce a lot of problems that I see people might have in Discord. And I can try it on a number of different ESCs and a number of different motors, and I can't make the same issue happen. And so yeah, it's each
So,
new improvement gets sort of harder and harder and takes more hours of development to do now because of these so many hours of testing on so many um, different hardware configurations that there's just yeah, it's getting more and more difficult. So I think the solution is more and more numbers of people
yeah.
helping us in
So
testing.
if people
So,
want to lend a hand and maybe preview some new interesting features, play with some cool code and provide feedback, how can they do that?
well, the easiest way is to jump onto our Discord, and then we can sort of guide you through the process. We have multiple ways of building and testing now. Andrew has been developing and working on the Makefile builds again. So we have build a GitHub can build through GitHub Actions too. So you can even just fork the project, make some changes, and download the binaries right
Oh,
from the what's produced with GitHub Actions. Or you can use Keel and use and you can build and develop and debug easily at home. But yeah, the easiest way to get started is to join Discord and then download the firmware um, or to fork the project and start tinkering. Um, get yourself a current limited power supply because there will be fireballs otherwise. But yeah, get an ST link, and that is what you need to get going with any of these things. And then you can sort of see behind the scenes of running ESC. So that's and we will help anybody out when it comes to setting up a setup to get debugging anyway, so we can have some more eyes on the code while running different combinations of hardware.
that's cool. I don't know. Someone just changed our branding in the middle of the show. There we are. Okay.
Was that you, Carl?
Well, someone led me to be aware of that, and then I was going on a hunt to get it to the correct branding. Now we're back.
I quite like the yellow, but anyway, I guess that might have been a Halloween setting that we had on from the last show. So Martian McFly has got a question here in the middle of things. Here's a bit of a technical question, but what impact does having an odd number of turns per phase have? A lot of tiny boot motors do this, and it's always baffled me. Odd or even number of turns, does it make any difference?
I don't think it does. No, it's I mean they like the number of turns on each winding. Is
Well,
that what
he's saying that
I
they
just don't.
hadn't. I thought it was purely the number. It didn't matter whether it was odd or even. Just the amount of current is going to be different if you have fewer turns, right?
Yeah, as you decrease the number of turns, your KV will increase, and your resistance will decrease. But I don't. Yeah, I mean the number. I thought the KV was mostly defined by the number of turns on the motor winding anyway. So
So the
decreasing
gauge
the
of
number
wire
will.
as well.
that might just be an engineering
Yeah.
thing down to the small production
Yeah.
size. Then that they can't do the windings the same way they do on the larger ones, perhaps.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
yeah.
I don't know the answer, and the as far as the ESC knows, it doesn't care. So it doesn't the number of windings per phase doesn't really make a difference to the logic of the way the motor's driven. So
Speaking of exploring ideas, I noticed a while ago, I think it was Alka, Pete, you put a couple of extra protocols on, and you started with Crossfire, I believe, CRSF, was that on then? And some other bits and pieces. And I think Andrew's been charging off and doing some other stuff for bigger drones. You want to tell us a bit about that?
well, Andrew, he is the drone can is his baby. So I'll let him talk about that for a bit.
Andrew?
Sure. Yeah. So DroneCAN is becoming the dominant protocol in larger UAVs, at least with ArduPilot. That's because a lot of the larger vehicles just use PWM, like servo style 1000 to 2000 pulse width with no feedback. D-Shot and BD-Shot is used by some, but it tends not to be as reliable with the really long cable lengths that you get in these vehicles, and the little 4-bit sum that it checksum that it's got in there is a bit weak. So DroneCAN gives a lot more flexibility, and it provides you with a protocol that you can use not just for your ESCs but also for your airspeed and GPS and rangefinder and all the other servos, etc. So DroneCAN has become the dominant protocol for all your peripherals on larger vehicles. And so one of the main motivations for me getting into AM32 was that opportunity to create an open source DroneCAN firmware, done right by my definition of done right, because there's a lot of DroneCAN firmwares, ESCs out there, most of them closed source. There's one or two open source ones, but they have various issues with them. And I really wanted a chance to be able to, get in there myself and change stuff. And I should give a bit of a shout out to another developer, Hoybeen, from Vim Drones. He's done this marvelous little development ESC. It's great.
Cool.
And so it's really cute little PCB. It's got a motor on the end there, CAN bus connector, debug connector, etc. And fantastic for development. So I was on a trip over to the conference in Japan, and I was spinning the motor on the plane. People were looking at me a bit weirdly, and what are you doing? Oh, I'm just playing with autopilots. And anyway, they're really nice little development one. So we've had our first flights on DroneCAN based AM32 ESCs, and now quite a number of vendors have now put their hands up to create larger ESCs. One contacted me the other day, 120 amp 12S, actually 14S capable 120 amp ESC, which is great to see. How well it actually works, we'll see when we start. Pete's having a bit of a laugh there to see how well that works.
Oh God.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, people they make these bigger and bigger vehicles. They want to carry big payloads, and they want to fly for a very long time, and so the vehicles get bigger and bigger. So
and the safety requirements too as well.
Yeah, but you want to get them more and more reliable. So anyway, we've got DroneCAN working quite nicely. Hopefully we'll get that merged into the main branch of AM32 soon, but we'll see when Pete's had a really good look at the PR. So that's still pending, but we've had quite a few flights on it, and I think it's going to be an important part of the ArduPilot ecosystem going forward, as they say.
So DroneCAN, is that similar to automotive CAN or drastically different?
Different messaging structure. similar concepts. Unfortunately, CAN is one of those transports where you can really only have one protocol on the bus. There are some exceptions. You can split between 11-bit protocols and 24-bit and have them both on the same bus at the same time. You've got this addressing scheme, and there's an 11-bit addressing scheme and a 29-bit addressing scheme. And so you can mix those two, but most of the larger, more developed protocols use 29-bit addressing. They do that so they can have a lot more types of messages. So DroneCan's a 29-bit one, so you can't have any other 29-bit on the same bus, which means you end up with a whole lot of competing protocols, right? And we've settled on DroneCan as the primary one for the ArduPilot ecosystem. And then all of the manufacturers have got on board with that. So lots of vendors are making, like GPS, airspeed, rangefinder, servos, ESCs. And most of my time with ESCs for DroneCan over the past few years has been working with existing vendors of ESCs, getting them on DroneCan, which has worked quite well, but it doesn't allow me to sort of dive in deep and make changes at the fundamental level. And work with someone like Pete, who really knows the motor control side so well, to be able to try to make something really, really robust. Because I'm just tired of aircraft falling out of the sky because of software failures in ESCs. It just happens far too often. And I mean, if there's a hardware failure, then sure, you've got a hardware failure, but I don't like having software failures causing aircraft to fall out of the sky. So I am hoping that we will reduce the number of, software bugs. We'll never get it to zero. That's the nature of software development, but hopefully reduce it. And
so is a drone CAN capable ESC a completely different beast to one that runs DShot or PWM, or is it the same?
They can
MCU?
do both. So this little one that I was waving about, so it's got, a CAN bus cable coming off it, but it's also got this D-Shot, BD-Shot, PWM cable coming off it. And, you have the potential to be able to have this as a backup for that or vice versa. So AM32 has got a little parameter, which is sort of what type of input, defaults to automatic detection between, D-Shot or PWM was AM32 called servo input. So I've added another level to that for DroneCan, and if it's set to DroneCan, then it actually turns off the interrupt handler for the D-Shot to make sure that noise on this line doesn't cause an issue. So it turns off both the DMA interrupt and the other interrupt on that. So, but otherwise you could set it to both. And then you've got to work out priority. You'd have to have a scheme where, if you stop getting signal on the CAN for a while, that it looks and sees whether it's got signal on this cable. I haven't set up a vehicle yet that's got both, but that's definitely going to be in demand to have a backup for some vehicles. The other thing that some vendors will like is having two CAN buses coming in. So you actually have two CAN ports coming in to the same ESC, and then you've got redundant flight controllers and two complete CAN buses going around to all your ESCs. Unit, welcome.
Hey,
Here's trouble. So, yeah. Anyway, it's lots of scope for twiddling around with.
We had a follow-up question to that from Caroline Tyler, RC, who mentioned Tesla trying CAN on an IP standard, and I think just before the show started, you'd mentioned some options in that area.
Yeah, we support running DroneCan on IPv4. We've got a stand. If you look at dronecan.org, you'll see there's lots of different transports for DroneCan. It's not just CAN. CAN is the most popular transport for DroneCan, but it actually can be carried over a whole bunch of different transports. And one of those is multicast UDP IPv4. So I expect that, that's what we do in our simulator because it's really easy to do in a simulator. But I'm expecting that'll be used on real vehicles as well. So
So
I'm already
Ethernet.
using that for some devices. Yeah, Ethernet, exactly. So I've got a couple of my vehicles have Ethernet in them, and I can access drone CAN peripherals on those Ethernet, but not ESCs yet over Ethernet. So that's something to look forward to.
So
I
many,
should
many
add
options.
to a drone CAN ESC does have to have some physical differences from the existing AM32 ESCs out there. It needs to have a CAN transceiver on the ESC itself and an MCU that's capable of hardware CAN communications. So it's not something that we can just make all ESCs work with CAN. So it is a different ESC that will be made for drone
Okay,
CAN.
so this isn't just a software conversion process. You need some actual hardware enablement. Okay,
Yeah. It's
so it's
yeah,
like a
Does the
PHY
hardware
layer
layer as
on
well.
there.
Does the ESC need to be mounted to the dev breakout for PCB as well?
Oh no. These you can get. I mean, there are lots of different
It's
form
joke.
factors. So yeah,
It's what you had. No, I was just like,
yeah. Here's
it's
the.
really for our audio
If
list.
I can.
It's such a neat little breakout
So that's
device.
a little one from the same vendor, Huaibin from Vim Drones. Tiny little one, and then I've got a dev one here. So this is a dev one from another vendor. So now this one's really practical to
Holy
fit on
Christ.
every
Oh,
drone.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
you
you can
easily get
imagine
that
having
on
8 of
tracing.
these on an octo quad, and I think the rubber band is a nice touch. That's how I
Yep.
attach it to my drones, just rubber bands and zip ties, and a very practical ESC. This one.
Not layout optimized.
I'd love to see that like mounted to a toothpick or something. That would be hilarious.
You could
Just
sort of
imagine.
construct the quad out of a few of these, just clamps. You know, you could use little C clamps to put it around. I think that'd be a
Just
good
use some
drone to
gaff
build.
tape. You'll be good.
Wasn't there once a drone where you had a base plate which was basically a PDB?
Yeah, I've got one of
Don't
those.
get Jack started. Oh,
Yeah,
Andrew's got
yeah,
one as
yeah.
well.
I've got one. Yeah. If
Blackout
you
or ZMR
so
or was it?
this is
Oh wow.
Oh, the
So
light
that's,
team.
yeah, it's a light show
No.
drone. Lots of LEDs, so it's got huge numbers. See all those LEDs along
Whoa.
here?
Yeah.
Every arm's got piles of LEDs and two 18-650s, and then this one was designed for going indoors. These little
So that
these
is
little
literally
things
what we
are
would have seen a
IR
while ago
reflections.
doing light shows.
Ah,
Yeah, so this
Yeah.
was for flying indoors. I was flying it inside a this little indoor arena that has this sensing system so you can measure the position and attitude, positioned within millimeters and attitude to within tiny fraction of a degree. Then it's all just a PCB. It's really neat actually for quite a long flight time, and it's a really neat little design. I like this one a lot.
No hard landing.
Is that
It's great.
XM receiver like soldered on?
Yeah, that's I think I soldered that on. It came from some other receiver, and I think that's a XSR or some similar little receiver on there that I put on the end there.
Yeah.
It's just
Held
got a
on with,
3-pin
like,
connector
DuPont.
you can put. Yeah, it is just DuPont there, and then you put whatever you want in there, and I've just soldered that one on. But it's also got Wi-Fi, so it's got an ESP32 Wi-Fi thing there, which is quite neat.
Nice.
So these sort of
Oh,
little
fine,
drones
though.
are great. These are great research ones, like
Yeah.
universities, and people. I was using it to fly Lysidue curves indoors, like with a 3D, so it had a height in the Lysidues. Like I don't know whether you know the ABC logo, ABC Television Australia. It's this Lysidue type curve. It looks a bit like a triple figure 8 type thing,
And you just do a
and try
long
to fly that as
exposure with
fast
the
as you
light
can, right? So the idea is to fly that really, really, really fast in this funny pattern. It's the sort of thing that generates conference papers. Was
Was that
that
to fly it as fast as possible for persistence of vision? So the LEDs made it look
Yeah.
like it was.
Well,
there.
I wasn't doing persistence
I
of
thought-
vision. I was just trying to push it
gonna
harder
say,
and harder and
that'd be
harder until it couldn't
Yeah.
hold it, and it flew off against the wall, and that was fun. It was more about the control algorithms. So and also pushing the state estimation, because the little EKF on board that's estimating where you are and your velocity and attitude, with really hard accelerations around those corners as you push up the speed, and it gets quite tricky. So there's there's a lot of stuff related to, you know, the state estimator keeping up with those high rates. We've got a project we're starting with aerobatic copters, or autonomous aerobatics, trying to do freestyle schedules autonomously. So trying to produce nice schedules. So we're aiming to demonstrate that later, or middle of next year, something like that.
Huh. So I have a random question sort of out of left field, which is not on topic with anything we were talking about. But as a Canadian, I'm curious, AM32.ca, is there any Canadian something going on in the background there? Oh, well.
You haven't noticed the accent?
Well, I did, but you can never tell. Like Canadians,
very
Americans.
polite.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I'm from Nova Scotia, Canada. So that's where I'm based out of.
Ah,
So
okay. Yeah.
hence the CA domain name, and also am32.com was taken.
Yeah.
So with CA was the next best.
Less typing.
Yeah.
It's
No, I
better.
saw that. And
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah,
there's
I
gotta
like
be somebody
.cas.
Canadian. Someone's got to be Canadian on this. Yeah.
No, on
Red,
you know,
white,
just
and
outside
never
of
blue.
Bridgewater, Nova Scotia. So
Nice. We got
Yes.
a fellow Scotian, I think, in the chat here as well. I'm in southwestern Ontario, but yeah, that's cool.
Oh, nice.
These
So
bloody
I was going to
Canadians
ask
are
Ike
taking
kind
over.
of what he's excited about with the project these days. I'm glad you could join us. It sounded like it was touch and go, but great to see you here.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'm always excited, and yeah, I think that we are doing great job. Well, mostly Pete nowadays, because I'm not so active in the ESC development. I'm focused on other stuff like the configurator and such, which needs maintenance too. But yeah, I think that Pete is on a great track on improving stability greatly. And we are. I think I'm not sure how far into a testable firmware for the outside are you?
Oh, I mean, yeah, we've been working on the challenges for 12S ESCs for a little while now. And this goes back to what Curry Kitten was saying there about it should be simple. Once you develop an algorithm to control a motor, it shouldn't matter what voltage you run that motor at. But we're finding that as the voltage increases, and especially as we get over sort of 30, 40 volts and up into the 50, 60 or higher volt range with 12 to 14S, that there's a massive amount of things we have to tweak and fiddle with on the ESCs to control slew rates, to control de-energization of phases, to try to just keep things in control. Because it's, I mean, we're talking about major changes when it comes to throttle changes in terms of voltage per second compared to lower voltage rates and lower voltage levels. And it's been a real challenge. So the last few weeks have been devoted just to 12S ESCs and higher, and trying to get commutation times more stable when things go wrong. When phases get saturated on motors, which is something that happens too, and when zero crosses are skipped. So so that is the goal, and that's the challenge right now, is to try to get those running a little more stably. But it's tricky. I mean, even just developing these things where when you've got a 2200 sized quadcopter motor on a bench beside you spinning up while you're on your computer making changes, it's not a not that scary. But when you've got a 50 volt 12-inch prop 400 kV motor spinning like a lawnmower 3 inches away from your laptop that you're trying to, like, because you have to have all these
And the
wires hooked
cables
up to
might be
the
carrying
ESC.
100 amps each. It all just gets a little bit daunting, huh?
Yeah, that's right. And it's with developing lower voltage stuff, if something goes wrong, it might desync and gets hot. that's no big deal with 12S stuff. Something goes wrong, it just turns into a nuclear fireball on your desk, and it. I mean, there's so little chance for error. It's whenever anything does go wrong, it's a major event. When you're talking such high voltages and currents, so yeah, it's hard on the nerves, but little by little, we're getting there. And I realize now that I think getting this stuff working is not not a breakthrough that all of a sudden I'm going to find some new routine that's going to magically make it work perfectly. It's a whole lot of little steps and a whole lot of little things that have to come together to slowly improve things, to make these higher voltage motors and bigger props and larger current draws a little more stable. And then as soon as we do, somebody's going to go up to 16S or 24S and 24-inch props.
Yep.
And
Before
then we'll
you
have
know
to
it, you'll
start the
find
whole.
your kitted e-bikes and God knows what. Your
Yeah,
desk per
so
month rate is just going to go through the roof, man. You're going to need to get a new desk every week or so, just scorch marks everywhere.
oh, it is ridiculous. I've got a 4-foot plywood box beside me on my
All right.
desk with a motor inside it, just to give myself some blast protection when things go wrong inside there. But the ESC, unfortunately, is sitting on my desk, and it's yeah, I've got little scorch marks all over the place. It's
Yeesh.
things sit on a little wooden pad, so I've got a little wooden pad that when it does burn, it doesn't burn my desk, it just burns this little pad instead. And each one of those is a dead ESC on there. Those
Well, it's
black
all a
marks.
learning
Ah.
experience.
Yeah, yeah, and it's it's not as when you're dealing with low voltage stuff too, and you've got a whole roll full of $8 ESCs. If you burn one out by trying some new routines and making a stupid mistake, you just throw another one on there. But when you burn $150 motor or $100 ESC out,
Yeah.
just in development, it's not something that I don't have a stack of them behind me. I can just grab another and throw it on the desk. So yeah, progress is definitely slower, but well, I'm gonna keep on working on it
Something
anyway.
else that always comes up here, we've got people who always, what about for faster update rates? What about 1200 updates per second? What about 2400 updates per second? What about 4800 updates per second? I mean, what's your take on that? And mechanically, what do you think the motor can actually represent in terms of update rates?
Oh, the motor is glacially slow compared to those update rates. I mean, you probably wouldn't really be able to tell much of a difference in terms of motor response between 100 hertz and 1,000 hertz and 32,000 hertz or whatever the higher update rates are at. Um, for really finely controlled PID responses, I mean, the lowest latency, the better. But the physical response of a motor with a prop is so slow compared to those update rates. You could send the throttle one step per update from 0 to full throttle and back to 0 again before the motor would even twitch. So it's I don't think that there is a reason to have as low a latency as possible, but chasing massive update rates when the motor itself is a gigantic, slow moving blob compared to it.
Especially for the big stuff, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like it's
so maybe for whoops perhaps, but you've got the little 7mm motors and stuff like that.
Yeah, the faster the the possible physical rate of change, the faster the update rate can be. But with these big motors, I mean, they won't change very even within one turn. They might not change RPM very fast. It could take quite a few turns before they even really have a double their RPM, for example. So by that point in
Otherwise, the
time,
heating effect would be pretty insane because they're never 100% efficient, right? So the acceleration will cause a lot of heating, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a certain point where any faster of an update rate is not going to improve the response of a motor, and I think we've exceeded that already with the 4K D shot that we're using. I don't think anything beyond that's really going to make it
So you mean a
much faster.
4K PID rate with D-Shot 300? Would that be?
Yeah, and I mean even KISS that uses they have a much higher D-Shot rates. You know, they use D-Shot 1200 or D-Shot 2400,
Yeah,
but
24. Yeah.
they don't update it any faster. So it's not like that D-Shot signal is coming at a closer interval or a tighter interval. It's still being updated as a regular low, I think 4 kilohertz or 8 kilohertz PID loop rate. So I think the only advantage to those is you're getting a little bit lower latency because the signal is finished a little bit faster, but we're talking microseconds. So I don't know yeah, I'm not sure if it really is going to make much of a difference in the end.
Yeah,
For-
there is
How's
difference
Oh.
between real results and how easy it is to attract people, especially technical folk with higher numbers. Everyone likes higher numbers, so it's different. Sorry, Jack.
For example, sorry, go.
no, go on.
For Betafly, for example, you already saturate 4K loop rate with D-Shot 300. So the only reason to go 8K loop rate and D-Shot 600 is to enable bidirectional D-Shot for RPM filtering, because you basically halve the data rate in half. So data rate is 300 and bidirectional telemetry is 300, so it adds up to 600, and you already saturate the 8K loop with that. So for Betaflight, there's no reason to go any higher.
32K loop rate, IK. You can run 32K loop rate.
Wasn't there a time where that's where that was possible actually?
What were you going to ask, Jack?
Cole, you've got a question about the support for
Oh yeah. So
yes.
that is one thing. So with KISS Ultra, I've seen that's been added to the website recently, and the support for that. Just curious, I guess what that was all like with the development and working with Alexander and stuff.
Yeah, well, originally AM32 didn't work properly with D-Shot 1200 or 2400. We just stopped it at 600, and but we wanted to make sure that it worked with as many flight controllers as possible, and so we wanted to support KISS flight controllers as well. We've heard a lot of good things from pilots, and some pilots really love the KISS stuff. So
Cool.
seems to fly really nice and stable. So we wanted to make sure that AM32 works with those higher D-Shot rates too that people are used to with KISS stuff. So we had to just make sure that it could we had to just change some of the timings to allow so it can accept 1200 or 2400, and it can actually accept D-Shot signals of really any baud rate. It just compares the pulse time to the total packet time to work out whether it's a valid D-Shot signal or not. So we made those changes for KISS and worked with a few of their test pilots, and I hope they're happy now.
Well, you know what? Yeah, like
it
so
should be working with them.
I saw a bunch of stuff that Almac was putting out. He was working on some with KISS Ultra and the AM32 stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with Almac. I'm guessing you may be.
Yes, I am. No, I talk to him every once in a while through the AM32 Discord, and no, we've he's helped me out immensely with testing and development. He's been my guinea
Very
pig.
lovely man.
To get the AM60 up and running. So it's and he's luckily very patient. So thanks a lot, Almac. I know you're in the chat there, but
Yeah, we just had him on last week, I think. So hello, Al. Hope you're doing well.
Yeah. Also shout out
Great
to Alexander himself, who helped tremendous in fixing the configurator to work with KISS Ultra, and he actually wrote the code to make it more stable for everybody himself, and I added it to the configurator.
Lovely.
That's
Very
awesome.
talented man. Very.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to know him. Even though we do annoy the piss out of him. I'm sorry.
Yep, that's fair. We definitely do.
Thanks.
know I do.
Thanks, Fed. Oh man.
Fedor, the man.
Yes. How I can't believe, Pete, am I right? I checked out an interview with you, and this all started because you wanted to run DIY firmware. Is that right? Like
Yeah,
DIY
yeah.
ESCs and stuff. Insane.
Yeah.
Like,
It started because well, I was I wanted to make a lot of BLHeli SESCs at first. So I was making those DIY and just flashing BLHeli S, which was readily available to them, and it was great for hobbyists because you can just play around with your own hardware, download one of the hardware profiles that matches, and away you go. And I was really excited about 32-bit BLHeli 32 to be able to do that with my firmware, but unfortunately it wasn't so. So yeah, that's what started because I had to make something work on the hardware that I was playing around with at the time. So
Well, I'm glad to see you stuck to it because you've created a juggernaut here. It's fantastic to see.
yeah.
oh,
For a
thanks.
fullback, you're amazing. Like, thank you.
I mean, I was flashing the stuff while buying BLHeli 32 and paying their license fee, and then spending hours trying to figure this out and flashing it and importing weird little dongles from AliExpress to flash the 8032 hardware and everything. And yeah, I think it's fantastic.
Speaking of which, have you seen Andrew?
Well, I
unlock
have
her
now.
tool?
If only that had been around a year ago, my life would have been much
That
simpler.
deserves
Sorry.
a special mention, especially for anybody who's out there doing any flashing. Maybe Andrew, you can talk a little bit about that tool.
Oh, yeah.
What are you,
what it
the
does for us.
flasher? I love you.
I found it. Showed it to Jack, and yeah, he found it very easy. So tell us more about it, Andrew.
Yeah, it was just I noticed a lot of people struggling with the getting the debug connection and having to solder. I'm terrible at soldering. Really, the fine soldering you have to do, in order to get a stable link to your debugger, especially on a 4-in-1. And that was a real struggle. And as any software engineers knows, if you're having a trouble with hardware, you try and fix it in software. And so the idea was to try to automate that. And I initially just did it as a little bash script. So it was a little while true, open OCD, flash, 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 right? And then you hold the pins and then it goes okay. And so then it was just a matter of wrapping that in a GUI. So and with a little beep so it's done, so you don't have to look at the screen and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm really glad it's been useful for people. And I mean the GUI is pretty crude, but it does the job.
If you only need to use it once.
Yeah, it was nice when I did a 4-in-1 with it, being able to go tap 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 tap. You often have to scrape off the little covering. They've got little conformal coating on. Although an interesting thing about that, I do slightly worry about people end up then flying, of course, with that conformal coating scraped off. And we had this issue in the past with ArduPilot where the debug pins, like the debug connector, was exposed on the side of the vehicle. And we found on some vehicles, you could make them reboot by putting your hand on that connector. And so, your fingers touching between the clock and data pins. Yeah, and it was just these particular vehicles. It was possible. So we've now changed ArduPilot by default to disable those debug pins just by not setting the auxiliary functions on those pins to enable them. And there's a parameter in ArduPilot that sets whether to enable those. You've got to then set that parameter or a debugger won't attach. And it might be nice to do that in AM32, but the problem is that also makes it harder for people to then replace the firmware if something goes badly wrong, right? But I do slightly worry that there's a small chance of a bit of electrostatic discharge or whatever on those exposed pads, a bit of moisture, a drop of rain, you know, with a bit of grime from, you know, soot from cars or
Well, I suppose
whatever.
you can always get a little bit of conformal and just dab it on after you've got the bootloader on.
Sure, but again, software engineer, you know,
Yeah,
if
right.
it's
Who's
if it's
gonna
above the
remember
level
that?
of like zip ties and sticky tape, then it's sort of beyond my capabilities.
What about hot glue? Do you include that in the list?
Yeah, I do have a hot glue gun. As funnily enough, I bought one of the
That's
US
hydrochloric,
110
though.
volt hot glue guns, and I find that run it on
Oh, dear.
250 volts in Australia, and it
that'll
really
get
heats up
results.
fast.
Yeah.
That was great.
Jesus
So
Christ.
I've
What
got
is
a
wrong with
really
you?
fast heat up, you know, hot glue gun.
You're on a live podcast. Shut up. If you're
Wait a minute.
home insurance,
I've
got
only
someone
had
for
to
that.
trip the house thing a couple of times when I plug in the hot glue gun. Most of the time it works, but it does
You're an
heat up
animal.
fast. Yeah.
Now, I'm not telling you to do this, but if you get the temperature controlled ones and
Oh.
bypass
They're a thing,
so
are they?
it's just direct, it
Right.
goes. When it comes out, it bubbles and it fires steam.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah.
Do that rather than 110, baby.
All right. Okay. So you
So
sort
you're
of
trying to-
steam the glue on. Yeah, that sounds like a
You're
great
an
idea.
animal.
Propel
You
it
are
out
an
like some
animal.
kind of super soaker with a jet of steamed glue.
Yeah. Right.
Excellent.
Do you-
Excellent. Great advice.
Do you guys wanna hear something awesome about Andrea's another thing?
Go ahead.
Not really.
Do you guys all know Zamba?
I haven't worked on that for a long time. But,
Zamba.
Zamba, SMB Zamba.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. Say hello to the creator.
yeah, that was a long time ago. That was procrastinating while working on
Which
my
version is
thesis
that?
a long time
back
ago.
in the version 1 days or up to version 3? Or I think we're on 4 now. Aren't we?
Version 4. I started all the ones up to version 4, but then I hung up my Samba development hat and handed over to the rest of the team. I haven't done
Yeah,
Samba
yeah.
development for a long time.
Well done. That's made
but-
a lot of my infrastructure hum along happily. So good stuff.
Yeah, it's good. It's really good feeling to make software that people find useful. As I'm sure Peter's discovered, the satisfaction that comes from, you know, appreciated software, and the frustrations sometimes when it doesn't work, and you know, oh no, you blew up my ESC. Yes, that happens too. And
Yeah, I've heard a few harsh words now and then too,
that
throughout
happens.
the past few years. But
Yeah.
you know, that's going to happen. I mean, when we've got thousands of people using something and millions of combinations,
Yep.
it's not all roses, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So-
the Betaflight team here's the same thing. You need very thick skin to deal with all of the users, because it's 99% good news that you don't hear, and 1% ruin someone's day, and they'll hang around all week to tell you about it.
Mm. And crash logs
Yeah.
takes on a whole new meaning when they've got flying vehicles.
Oh, yeah.
One final question that I want to ask is, what is the highest voltage you officially support, and what you're hoping to get to? What's the roadmap for the high, you know, the voltage support of AM32 ESCs? I suppose that's
think
more of a hardware
safe-
thing, isn't it?
I think safe for now is 8S, right? And
Okay.
nothing above 8S is confirmed working.
Someone
And what
mentioned
it's,
a secure ESC in the chat. They were talking about something that looked like a 12S ESC.
Yeah.
It shouldn't really matter. That's where it shouldn't really make much of a difference. But what we're
Shouldn't,
doing
that's
now is
correct.
having to create software workarounds for hardware impossibilities. So we're reaching this stage where the hardware can't work on 12S as it is. So these 12S ESCs, if we were to change voltage from 0 to 50 volts and give these motors full voltage right off the bat, something would break, whether it's in the motor or something in the ESC, or it would just there'd be problems. So as the voltage increases, there really shouldn't be logic changes that we have to do, but because the hardware, we have to keep things under control. We have to keep voltage fluctuations to a minimum and voltage ripple. We have to now do workarounds to make that higher voltage work. I mean, in the past, AM32 has been used on 150 volt DC water pumps. But they run at a fixed RPM. They slowly reach they go from a low speed gradually up to their final RPM, and then they just run at that one speed forever. And the hardware was made with that in mind too. So it worked fine, but and the ESC will work fine at 12S too, but it might not work fine at 12S if somebody all of a sudden demands 100% throttle when they're at 10% throttle from all four motors on an ESC. Something might go wrong then. So that's why it's, I think the highest supported firmware hardware right now it works reliably at 8S, but there are 12 SESCs that some people work and use perfectly fine depending on their setup. But you have to be aware that AM32 is not doing a lot of restriction for you, so you have to do it yourself. If you're going to go to 50% throttle and then slam it to 100% throttle, the firmware is not going to stop you from just applying that voltage, and it's going to try to do whatever you're asking it to, which is going to exceed the limits of a lot of hardware. So it's we're going to have to add more of the protections that BL Heli had. So things that BL Heli 32 did in order to sort of mitigate disaster from these larger ESCs, like slew rate limitations. So we're not allowing a massive throttle jump. Also looking at sort of active phase de-energization or demag compensation is what they called it for BL Heli 32. More low throttle protections for those high voltage, lower RPM motors. So, in order to account for all those fringe situations, we're going to have to just add in a whole lot more options that people can enable to.
It's going to be a complex beast then.
It is, yeah.
I'd like to get to 24S.
Yeah.
So,
all the way up to 96 volt.
But it'll take a while. That's not going to be next week. That year or two. But there's quite a number of 24S vehicles that I'd love to see AM32 on, and they're currently flying like the 24S T motors, that sort of thing. And I'd love it to be an option to be on AM32 instead.
Well, we have a few pilots here who've flown X-Class. I think Clive FPV has flown one of those, and Zoe FPV, she was definitely kind of one of the proponents of X-Class. And that crowd are all 12S, 14S, so there might be a couple of test pilots there.
Yep.
You guys have got a lot of love in the chat.
Yeah, everyone thinks you're fantastic. And shout out to Ike as well. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk to you as much as the other guys, but I think the config tool that you did, the AM32 CA config tool, is really nice, and that really lowers the barrier to entry for a lot of users as well, which is fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. That's been fantastic.
Okay, I think we're, on that note, coming up to the end of our slot, so we'd like to thank the AM32 team. We've had Andrew here, and Pete, and Ike. Thank you, guys. You're doing a fantastic job. The community and everyone here really loves the work you're doing. Appreciate you tremendously. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome.
Cool. And thanks to all our Patreons for keeping the show going and paying all the hosting and editing costs. You're amazing as well. And we'll bid you adieu for another Let's Drone Out episode. You have been joined by everyone's favourite curry kitten.
Right.
Firtling around with his sheets of cardboard. It's Jack.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I was trying to make an ESC monster out of my friend, but they're not playing.
And also Cole. Thanks very much.
See ya.
Thank you. Good night.
Myself, Stephen, too. Good night. Catch you later.
Bye.
Bye.
See you, everybody.
Bye.